Animal Crossing punishments. Sometimes an action has a reaction. And while causation doesn't always mean correlation, in every Animal Crossing game in one way or another, if you do one thing, Animal Crossing has an interesting way sometimes to punish players for doing something a specific way, or not doing something at all. Like a really simple one. In Animal Crossing New Horizons, if you're playing on Halloween, a villager runs up to you, says trick or treat. If you don't have candy on you, or you deny them candy, heck hath no fury, they'll mess up your face with paint. Okay, so maybe this example is not one of the biggest examples of crazy things happening because you didn't do something or you did something a certain way, but you can see where we're starting here because things are interesting. Some of these may seem more dramatic than other instances, and some of these are just simple little things that you don't maybe think about all the time, but we're taking a closer look at some of the Animal Crossing punishments here, and they're kind of interesting to look at. In Animal Crossing City Folk, if you don't play the game for 15 days in a row, when you come out of your house, your hair's all messed up. Honestly, no big deal. In newer games like New Horizons, this happens, you just straighten up your hair and you continue with your day. Awesome. City Folk does things differently. Your hair will actually remain messed up until you make a trip into the city, go find Harriet, and have a new hairstyle done at Shampoodle. Otherwise, if you don't do this, you're just running around with bedhead all day, and that's just what you gotta deal with. In the original Animal Crossing game for the GameCube, there was a mechanic where if you spent too much time in the sun during the summertime, your character would essentially cook or get a very deep tan, and this was supposed to be an incentive to get players to use an umbrella and use it as a parasol to protect yourself from the sunlight and not get cooked. It is kind of funny, over time you can get pretty burnt, but there weren't really any other effects other than just your appearance, which was something oddly enough you couldn't change anyways. It only happened after real prolonged play, so not a lot of people ever implemented the umbrella as something to protect themselves from the sun in that game. Okay, Mr. Resetti is one of the most obvious examples that we have to talk about in this video real quick. He's like the perfect example of a punishment for not doing something. You don't save your game, you reset the game early. In those older games, he would pop up and just talk forever and ever and ever, reminding you not only how bad you were for not saving, but also giving you a little bit of a punishment for not saving. But in some of the older games, he would even take things a step further. We talked a little bit about this in our Mean Villagers video, but yeah, he would threaten to reset your save altogether and scare you into thinking your game was deleted, or he'd even make you type up phrases and you have to get them perfectly correct or else he makes you type them again. In Animal Crossing Wild World, Lyle was a very interesting character. He'd come around and try to sell you health insurance, and it really was just a big scam. He would just steal a ton of bells away from people. And he keeps showing up and keeps making you buy another plan even if you've already purchased it one time before, and I've been scammed into this in my runs of Wild World. I thought I was supposed to just buy it to get him to go away. There's no way to say no to him. He just keeps pushing, and the only way to end the conversation is to purchase it again. It took me so long to realize that if he's at my door, I need to just walk away and not say anything to him. Once I figured that out, it became less of an annoying thing, but yeah, you get a punishment straight up in the game for being silly and talking to this guy who keeps scamming you. So I guess this is a lesson learned. If someone scams you once, don't ever talk to them again, I think. Nowadays, most people kind of know the ins and outs of dealing with Red and his paintings and how he sells fake paintings, and you have to discern the difference between the right painting and the wrong painting. But if you were a kid in the earlier Animal Crossing days and you didn't know this, you easily could have fallen into getting penalized for buying a work of art without doing your due diligence first to make sure that the art piece was actually real. And back in the older days, these fake art pieces weren't worth anything and you couldn't turn them into your museum, so you were just scammed out of the money you spent on that art piece. Nowadays, we know to look up the art pieces ahead of time, or if you're like me, you just embrace the fake art and just throw it up somewhere. But I do wonder how many kids out there were heartbroken to find out that their art piece that they purchased and were so proud of was in fact a forgery. There's a big debate in the Animal Crossing community as to whether this next one's a glitch or an actual punishment. I'm still unsure. I think it might be a punishment, or it's a glitch that happens as a result of doing something a certain way, which still is a punishment nonetheless. In the original Animal Crossing game, if you traveled to a different town by using the memory card things in the GameCube, and then you remove the memory card, you don't save and travel back home safely, when you load up your game again, your face will terrifyingly look like this. I know we've mentioned this one before, but man, this one is, I don't know, just super spooky, and I like to talk about it when I do get the chance. Also, your inventory will be empty, which is kind of lame too. Another Another interesting thing that's been in every Animal Crossing game, if you don't play your game for a while and, you know, keep up with your house, eventually you can get roaches in your house running around from one end of your house to the other, and it's up to you to run through your house and actually clean it, making sure there's nothing hiding underneath furniture and stomping out all of the roaches that run around and make your house all gross and dirty. New Horizons did something really interesting though and added an extra element to this to kind of make fun of the fact that, first of all, if you haven't played in a while and you have roaches, and second of all, if you haven't taken the time to clean up the roaches, you could have a villager stop by your house to hang out, and then they won't be too happy if they see roaches running around from one end to another some of the time, and they might just abruptly choose to end their visit upon seeing the circumstances and the living style that you currently live in. In Animal Crossing New Horizons, if you decide to fill your island to the brim with objects from one end to the other, really just maximizing your potential space with your island, if you have a flying balloon present just going by and you shoot it down and there's not enough space for it to land nearby, well, you can kiss that present goodbye as it will disappear because there's nowhere for it to go. And that's actually really heartbreaking. So either purposely leave a spot open for the balloons where you want to land them, or just be willing to occasionally lose them. The beach is a good spot though to try to catch a balloon. In Animal Crossing New Horizons, there's very easy ways to increase your friendship with a villager. For instance, if it's their birthday, you can actually get them a present. You can wrap the present, and depending on what it is, they might like it more, and your friendship points will actually go up, and that's a secret mechanic hidden in the game that makes your friendship bonds stronger across your villagers. But you can actually end up hurting your friendship too if you're a little more thoughtless in this matter. Now, you don't have to wrap your presents. You can just give them a gift and they'll be happy to get that, sure, but you can also just give them straight up trash, like garbage, and their reaction's always a little interesting. And yeah, people have looked into the game files, and sure enough, giving a fellow villager garbage for their birthday will actually lower your friendship bonds by a couple of points, which is kind of an interesting mechanic built into the game, but fair enough. I mean, you're giving them garbage as a gift. I don't know. Okay, notice how earlier in the video we talked about how in Animal Crossing New Horizons, for the most part, there's very minor penalties for taking long times of break off. Like, your hair fixes itself, you might get some roaches, but there wasn't really anything overtly new added to New Horizons for punishing players for taking time off, except one little thing, and for some people, they don't even think about it. But for the people who do care about this specific feature, it is so frustrating. But yeah, Nook Miles. Every day you use the Nook Miles machine inside of the resident services, you get a little bit more, and you get a bonus for each subsequent day that you play until you got a nice little chunk of Nook Miles coming in every day just for logging in and checking out what's going on. But man, it's heartbreaking if you have a good streak going and then you miss a day, boom, all the way back to the lowest number you get for checking in on your Nook Miles, and it takes a few days to build up again. It's a silly punishment, yes, but I've been frustrated by this one, so I wanted to make sure I put it in the video somewhere. I mean, to be fair, I guess it's not as bad as what can happen in Animal Crossing City Folk, where you can actually get an upgrade to your Nook store, you know, for spending bells and playing enough, but occasionally if you take enough time off or you don't spend enough money at Nook store, he might decide to downgrade his store or ask you about downgrading his store to an older version, which is something odd enough and something that never came back again in a later Animal Crossing game. But yeah, I mean, you could risk losing some big progress in your town just like that. There are also interesting ways that you can make bells that are pretty easy in any Animal Crossing game. One of the big ways right away that new players find that they can make money is shaking trees. Sometimes money falls from the tree, sometimes furniture falls from the tree, or sometimes a hive of bees falls from the tree, and oh my goodness, do you need to run for your dear life. I don't know, I think that this was such an interesting concept, but it implemented a very early form of risk reward right out of the get-go when Animal Crossing first came out for players to experience. And I mean, the punishment isn't that bad. You kind of just look scuffed for the rest of the day. But hey, it did add a little bit of tension and a little bit of excitement, not knowing what's gonna happen when you shake the wrong tree, and I just think that that's a fun staple of the Animal Crossing franchise now, and bee stinging has existed now in every mainline Animal Crossing game, and hopefully, for whatever reason, it doesn't go away anytime sometime soon, as odd or scuffed as it might be. Okay, just like the whole shake trees, get bees type thing that Animal Crossing had, there were other little things that were established in Animal Crossing that always added a bit more tension and a bit more risk reward to just the most simplest tasks. For instance, there were pitfall seeds, which were around in the games also, which I don't know if those were there just to punish you or just to, I don't know, make you upset or something. Of course, they're fun to use on villagers, but I guess they were maybe also put into the games as a pseudo punishment for not digging up the little holes in the ground before running on top of them. Another example of something like this that's a pseudo punishment is like when you're fishing for a long time and you see a cool looking fish and it seems really easy to catch and nope, it was garbage the whole time. More recently, in New Horizons, they finally added like the insect equivalent of a miniature punishment in the form of tarantulas and scorpions. One thing that I find really interesting though is these guys, they won't mess with you. They'll actually leave you alone. They won't be bothered by you unless you pull your net out. When you have your net out, it is game on. These guys do not care. If you move too close to them while you have your net out, they will sting you. So if you're making money catching insects or whatever, be prepared, because if one of these guys is out at night, they'll be coming right after you. In a lot of the older Animal Crossing games, the questionnaire that the character talking to you asks you, whether it's Rover in the older games, would actually dictate the way that your character looked in game. So these questions are incredibly important. And while, of course, just answering the questions honestly or whatever based on what you think can lead you looking just fine, if you're kind of rude and standoffish and you just purposely pick the worst answers, you can end up looking a little bit goofy, like this guy. And in the older games, you couldn't really change your eye shape, so whatever you got was what you were stuck with, and you just have to deal with that. Okay, in newer Animal Crossing games, we get the luxury of having our villagers straight up tell us when they're thinking about moving, and they'll even ask for our opinion, where we can stop the move right there and then and not have to worry about losing our favorite villager. But in the older games, that definitely wasn't the case. That wasn't the way that things worked. It seemed to differ from game to game, but essentially if you didn't talk to your villagers enough, you were at risk of possibly losing a villager and having them move away. Alternatively, in some of the games, it also may have considered which villager you talked to the most and purposely use that villager to pull at your heartstrings and make you heartbroken for your favorite villager to move away. It was never too specific, and I feel like there was a lot of ambiguity onto how these algorithms worked back in the day, and I'm sure someone out there figured it out to a T, but still, it was all about like your relationship with the villagers, and then at the same time, the game would just randomly come at you with a unexpected villager departing, and it was pretty sad. At least in New Leaf, they would give you a heads up some of the time and maybe tell you they're thinking about moving, but other times your villager would just straight up be gone and they would just leave you a letter and that's all you could go off of. It was even worse in the earliest games like the GameCube version and Wild World, because if you went and visited a friend's town, it would guarantee that one of your villagers would be planning on moving out and moving over to your friend's town in a given amount of time. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, based on my own experience back on the GameCube, it would even sometimes pick your villagers in order of who was there the longest in your town. So when my friend came and was hanging out and made me visit his town, it automatically triggered my last remaining original villager from day one in my town to move to his town. And it was pretty upsetting. Okay, there's a couple of interesting things also in Animal Crossing games when it comes to turnips specifically. If you leave a rotten turnip out for too long, it will attract ants, and that's kind of nasty, except if you need to catch ants and then put them in your museum, then I mean, it's a cool way of doing it, but otherwise, yeah, clean up your island. Animal Crossing Wild World introduced the red turnip, which was a great way to make a ton of bells. All you had to do was plant the seeds and make sure you water them every day. After 7 days, you would have a giant red turnip that you could sell for quite a big profit. However, if you missed a day, it would all be for nothing, and you would lose out on any profit you could have had. High risk, high reward, but it definitely rewarded players who played the game daily and remembered to water their turnips. I've forgotten to water it before, and it's heartbreaking. Okay, but now we need to talk about the elephant in the room. One of the biggest things in Animal Crossing that definitely is a built-in form of punishment that have ranged from more severe in the older games to a little less severe but still existent in the newer games. We're talking about that elusive time traveling. Oh boy. In most Animal Crossing games, if you time travel, there is usually some level of penalty for adjusting the clock and moving freely to whatever date you choose. In Wild World, your town would be aggressively filled with weeds, and in the other games you would still get weeds, but maybe not as many as Wild world. In New Horizons, if you do some level of time traveling where you go back in time, you can often have it where your store won't reset, or events that were supposed to happen might not occur, like if you're building a bridge or something like that, it might get delayed a day. The biggest and most riskiest thing with time traveling is definitely the turnip game. If you're trying to make a lot of money with turnips, you put a lot of bells on the line to invest to make sure you have enough turnips so that when it's time to sell, you can profit. And for the most part in every game, if you're moving your clock forward, you don't have much to worry about unless you get to the end of the week and you haven't sold your turnips, then you're in big trouble. Your turnips will spoil and all of the money you invested into buying the turnips are essentially gone and wasted and yeah, just unlucky. However, if you are getting close to the end of the week and you panic and say you're time traveling a bit, if you turn the clock backwards, the game can tell if you've played in a time advanced from that, and on the spot, all of your turnips will spoil right there and then, and that's also pretty unlucky because you can lose a ton of money once again by investing all of your bells into turnips. But here's the deal, there's other risks involved with your turnips as well, as for example, you kind of have to figure out a place to put them all if you're waiting and holding out for that perfect turnip price in Tom Nook's store. And while some people have made gardens outside or just try to store them all inside of their house, these turnip placements could also affect your ranking in either your town or island score or your happy home score. So playing the turnip game is risky. You have not necessarily punishments for playing the turnip game aggressively, but consequences for sure, especially if time traveling is involved. In the later games like New Leaf and New Horizons, I feel like time traveling was approached a little bit differently in more of a play how you want to play your game type manner. Sure, in New Leaf you could still get this big ugly plant if you hadn't played for a long time where you time traveled too far in advance, and New Horizons really just gives you some weeds that aren't that hard to pick up. And then another after effect of time traveling also, of course, is how your mailbox works. In some of the older games, if your mailbox became full, you'd be unable to receive new mail, and essentially, if you time traveled too far ahead, you'd be missing out on any mail that you might have gotten. In New Horizons, however, it actually works the other way around, where you will continue to get new mail if you time travel too far ahead, and there's a reason for villagers to be mailing you stuff. It kind of depends on how often and frequently you check in and if you check your mail. But eventually, your oldest mail will start to be deleted, and you could risk losing some mail that way as well. But then there's one more category that this time around actually seems pretty heavy-handed. It's a little more abstract, so I kind of saved it here for the end of the video, but these are the things that Nintendo will punish you directly for doing in Animal Crossing, and it could be pretty big in punishment and severity. First, there's the obvious one. If you're caught modding your Animal Crossing island, there's been stories out there of various Animal Crossing players who have had their account banned from online connectivity because they modded their town. We all talked about this before, but remember the whole star tree situation from back in New Horizons days? Apparently there are reports of some players getting reported for modding their game to have star trees. I mean, I guess fair enough. You have to be strict when it comes to an online game and hacking in general. And it seems like from what we've seen on YouTube, Nintendo does have different levels of banning players based on the severity. Like for instance, if you upload a dream address of your island and it has something hacked in there, there's a chance that your dream address will just be taken down, where your whole Nintendo Switch account might not get banned. But if it's a step further and you're connected online and you're hacking actively, you could risk losing your entire Nintendo Switch account. It's the same thing when it goes to the different types of custom textures. Inappropriate textures are probably a no-go, so if you don't want to risk your account getting locked out, or at least your dream addresses getting taken down, you probably want to be careful with that if you're putting it out in the public where anyone can report your island. But there are some other interesting things that could cause for an online connectivity ban on your island, some that weren't even rules originally that only came later up in time. Political campaigns are an interesting one. I remember back when Animal Crossing first came out, there were various politicians inviting people to come to their Animal Crossing town, and that was kind of an interesting idea. Later on, Nintendo elaborated that this is against the policies now, and they would be enforcing dream addresses posted by politicians and taking them down, which is kind of an interesting stance to have, but I guess it makes sense. They want the game to be accessible accessible for everyone. The entire game got banned in China due to the free Hong Kong protests, which obviously had nothing to do with Nintendo, but maybe Nintendo is trying to avoid being misassociated with locations and islands that other players could create, as at the end of the day, they're the ones hosting the platform that curates these islands out there for players to look at. So political islands became a no-go. After a few months of Animal Crossing New Horizons coming out, Nintendo actually posted a blog post with like an outline of rules when you're engaging in online play that could risk you losing your account. It seemed like they were still supportive of the ideas of organizations or businesses engaging with their communities through Animal Crossing, as a ton of companies did that right away when Animal Crossing first came out. In that blog post, they're like, yeah, you can do this, but here are some of the rules, like be aware of the game rating and don't engage in activities that go beyond the rating. Obviously nothing vulgar, discriminatory, or offensive. And then that's where they brought up the whole politics thing, like refrain from bringing politics up in the game. Interestingly enough, you're not allowed to share false information about the game and not deceive others while using the game, like falsely indicating that you are separately licensed or otherwise approved by Nintendo. And then you're not allowed to leverage the game as a marketing platform for like a business or a social media platform. Like you can't be like, hey, come to my island and then you'll get the stuff if you follow me on Twitter. And then lastly, you're not allowed to obtain any financial benefit from using the game. So all of those people who like sell villagers on eBay for real world currency, definitely not allowed, though it doesn't necessarily say anything about Nookazon, which is really honestly just a trading platform since no real money is ever exchanged. It's only trading items for other items or items for villagers and whatnot. Yeah, Nintendo doesn't mess around, and you could just get your island wrecked for breaking any of these rules. And I mean, even in a broader scope, I remember for a long time Nintendo used to really crack down on anybody who was like a content creator even sharing gameplay footage from a game. Like if you showed too much of a cutscene, you risk your whole video being copyright claimed and monetized by Nintendo. And I feel like a lot of Animal Crossing content creators would have run into this issue had Nintendo not rolled over and changed their policy a few years back. Nowadays things are a whole lot more relaxed. But I guess at this point in the video we're getting a little bit off topic. So these are some of the punishments across the Animal Crossing games. Did we miss any? Listen, do you have any interesting stories of one of these examples or the first time you experienced any of these punishments? Let us know in the comments down below. Also, make sure you subscribe and notifications on. We are like creeping up in subscribers, like getting kind of close to 40,000 subscribers. We haven't even been at this for a year yet, so I'm still feeling like a smaller content creator, and the growth has been really awesome. I really appreciate you guys watching the content to the end and hanging out and growing this little community. So if you're new, you know, there's a subscribe button. And another good reason you could subscribe is because our outro music is this like cool mix of KK Bubblegum. So yeah, thanks for watching.